Hey everyone, and welcome to the Weekly Marketer Podcast. Every single week we interview deep dive experts in one of the many fields of marketing to drop huge knowledge bombs from the best of the best and teach you how to take your marketing skills to the next level. This is episode 002, and we're interviewing Tyler Hakes, who has scaled a site from 0 to 1 million in traffic in a year and now runs one of the best content marketing agencies in the game. Tyler, how are you doing today?
Hey, Jeremy, I'm really good, man. Thanks a lot for having me.
Yeah, no, thank you for agreeing to spend 45 minutes with me. So, I just want to kind of jump into a little bit, would love to kind of give our listeners, because you and I have worked together on a few things in the past and done a couple of different projects. And I've seen firsthand how awesome you are at like the content game, if you will. But would love to, give our listeners, a little bit of an intro about yourself. So could you tell the folks what you're all about?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you mentioned, my background is content marketing and SEO stuff. Essentially, I've been doing doing content.
Very technical.
Yeah. I've been doing content and SEO in some form, pretty much my entire career. And I came from a writing background. I studied journalism, and so I kind of fell into content marketing almost on accident. But I ended up, working for some consulting firms and agencies, and I did a short stint in the corporate world as well, doing content marketing and SEO there. And then in my last full-time gig, I ran marketing and growth for a venture-funded startup called College Raptor. And so that was really kind of an eye-opening experience for me doing that. And that's sort of the 0 to 1 million that you referred to is from my experience at College Raptor. Basically we went out and raised a Series A, and we had this tool for college matching, and we needed to build a strategy basically to scale the users there. And so we leaned pretty heavily on content marketing and SEO, and really built a pretty solid strategy and a framework for kind of how to rapidly scale your organic traffic and bring in those targeted users, specifically through organic search and social channels, and then converting those folks into users.
That's actually incredibly interesting. So what is that practically like? Taking somebody from zero. It was from 0 to 1 million, right? Like almost nothing or negligible traffic up to 1 million. What does that actually look like and feel like on a day-to-day basis? Because I think a lot of people, you put in the time, you put in the work, and it's 4 days into your new campaign, and you're like, why am I not, like rolling in users yet? Like, what does that growth look like? What does the day-to-day on that look like? That's really interesting.
Yeah. So it absolutely feels excruciatingly slow.
Okay.
There's no.
It takes a lot of grit to go to 1 million, right?
Yeah. Well, and I mean, and I think it takes a certain level of kind of trust in the process and trust in the strategy, because you're not going to publish stuff today that's going to rank number 1 tomorrow immediately, and you're going to have a huge explosion of traffic, especially when you're talking about organic. You can sort of see some bigger spikes and kind of see bigger traffic numbers in the short term if you're using social channels, community channels, etc., and kind of promoting that content and driving that more short-term traffic. But what I always tell people is that stuff is great and it serves its purpose within a strategy. But ultimately, what most folks want, especially when you're growing a startup and you're trying to scale, is you need that sustainable growth. You don't want to have to go up to bat every time and try to hit a home run. Like, you want something that's going to build over time and compound. And so that's where the organic stuff comes in. And so what I always tell people is, like, if you could hit 7% week over week growth in organic, you're on a really great trajectory. And again, that feels excruciatingly slow when you're in the early days. When you're going from 100 to 107 sessions a week, it doesn't feel like you're going to get there.
Or 50 to 53, like that. I mean, that feels like, it's like, why am I putting in hours every single day creating all of this content that barely anybody reads? Like, you know what I mean? Like, that's got to be tough. Like, so it's like there's got to be like a stick-to-itiveness, or maybe, I don't know, maybe all you content people are crazy, but I don't know.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, I think that's the challenge, right? Is that you have to think long term while acting short term, which is tough.
That's super interesting. And so now you are now the North Star for all these people trying to build all these different startups at various sizes, trying to build out this content, right? You're the one who gets to get on the client calls and be like, we're going in the right direction. It's all cool. Like everything's going good. So like, so tell me about what are you working on now then?
Yeah, so almost 2 years ago now, I left my job at the startup, and I decided that I was going to start a content marketing agency. So I run a company now called Optimist, and basically what we do is we kind of deploy the strategies and frameworks around content marketing and growth that I developed in my process of my whole career, but specifically at College Raptor, and then help other companies, kind of growth stage companies of different stripes, apply that content marketing strategy in a way that we know will build growth for them.
That's fascinating. That's cool. And you've got a pretty good sized team, right? And you're completely remote too, which is I always thought was cool. And except for like, was it last week or the week before that you all got together and had some sort of like crazy party on the beach or something?
Yeah. So we've got a team of about 12 folks now, and yeah, as you mentioned, yeah, we're all distributed remote, so it's kind of all over the map. And then yeah, last week we just had our first ever company retreat in San Diego. It was a great time. I mean, I think it's I'm one of those people that I'm a big proponent in general of remote work and kind of letting people work on their own time and do their own thing and all that stuff. But there's some value in getting in a room and talking face to face and just kind of hashing out stuff. If nothing else, it's just from a technology standpoint, sometimes it's difficult to get a lot of people on a call.
Absolutely. No, that makes a lot of sense. So that's really cool. So nowadays you're taking basically your expertise that you honed in a bunch of different roles where you were able to kind of, take and learn and grow with a bunch of different companies. And now you're kind of taking that to, again, a bunch of different companies, but this time is kind of the outside force that's doing the strategy and the execution as like kind of an agency for these sort of folks. So what sort of like, what's that like kind of going in-house to out of house out of house in-house to kind of consultant, right? Because I get that question from a lot of people. They're like, what's the difference, what's right for me, so I guess like could you sort of talk about like the differences in the roles a little bit?
Yeah, I think in-house definitely has some advantages. If you're working in-house, you do get to, I think you have a lot more kind of levers at your disposal. You can do a lot of different things. But the challenge with in-house for me, or when I was in-house at the startup and in other roles, one of the things that was always a challenge for me, I guess, was I think you had a lot. You didn't necessarily always have buy-in from the team, and you had to get a lot more buy-in for a lot more things. At least versus how we were set up with Optimist. So with Optimist, what we're looking for is really a client that's coming to us specifically for our expertise and really wants to let us run the show. And so they've already kind of bought into the vision of what we can do and how we're going to do it. And so there's a lot less like teeth pulling to like
Right.
just hey, we have to do a link building piece and we're going to spend all this time and money like outreach and pitching people or whatever. That's not really even a discussion because they've already understand the strategy and they've already bought into the idea of it versus like in-house where you might be talking to your CEO
Right.
who has no idea how SEO works or how link building works or whatever, and you've got to convince him that it's worth it to spend $10,000 on this campaign or whatever. That again is maybe not going to pay off right away. It's going to take months or years to really see the results. So I think that's one thing that's really advantageous for us, and as an outside role, like I think that is something that plays in our favor. And then for me personally, I think it's just really rewarding and satisfying to kind of go through the strategy process with a number of different clients and kind of approach and learn from different in different industries and things like that. Because that's another thing too, is that content marketing and SEO stuff is always changing, and so stuff that we are applying now is what we consider to be best practice, but as we move into new industries we might learn new things or we might see new stuff that is working there, and then we can apply it to other clients and things like that. And so it just gives us, I think, a lot more kind of context to understand the broader industry and a little bit more opportunity to be like creative and kind of innovative in terms of what we're doing for all of our clients.
Absolutely. I love that. So that's actually an interesting thing that you just kind of touched on that I kind of want to transition into, which is, you were talking about what's best practice today and like kind of, don't want to like go history of content marketing on you, right? But like, what kind of are you seeing that a lot of people are doing that is kind of old best practice, kind of what's best practice now, and kind of where do you see, for somebody that's like, okay, if I'm the average listener of this podcast, right, I'm probably somebody that's a pretty early stage startup, or I'm in-house and like a little bit junior, and like maybe I've got a pretty good grasp on what's going on today, but I kind of want to see what's in the future as well, right? And also understand if something that I think is best practice is outdated, and kind of being sunsetted. What are those sort of things? So yeah, I guess start with what used to be the best, what's the best now, and where, in your opinion, is all of this content marketing sort of organic stuff going to?
Yeah. That's a great question, and it's funny because you're absolutely right. I mean, I think anyone who's been kind of involved or loosely involved in startups or marketing or growth or whatever, most of those folks have gotten kind of a snapshot of like SEO or content at some point, and I think for better or worse, the landscape has evolved a lot, and so there's a lot of people with sort of varying levels of understanding of kind of what is modern.
I'm one of them.
Yeah, I mean, and
I'm one of them. I mostly do paid ads, right? Like I'm doing, AdWords, I'm doing Facebook, I'm doing Amazon, right? Those are like my big three. And like I interact with just enough people like you to know how to completely destroy something, but like not how to actually like build it, right? So I have like a very small snapshot of like kind of outside looking in. Yeah. So I mean, like it's not an atypical, even within our discipline, even with people that have been doing it for years, if it's not your focus, it's kind of
absolutely. Yeah. So I think the number one thing that I am just kind of a big proponent of is any of the kind of gray / black hat SEO things that people have done in the past, whether that's like paid link building or PBNs, or I don't know, even as far back as like cloaking and all the crazy stuff that people were doing to rank for different keywords. Remember back in the day when they used to tell you should bold all your keywords, even like
I mean, I had somebody legitimately suggest cloaking the other day, which is why I was laughing.
Yeah. So
no, what we need is more directories.
Yeah, right. I mean, and all that stuff, and honestly, like you can go around and around arguing about this stuff, and there's certainly folks that are in the industry who are running PBNs and they're really successful. But my opinion is that like over the years we just see as soon as that stuff becomes prominent, it will eventually die out. Google will find it and they'll penalize it. They'll figure out how to sniff it out, whatever. So as kind of a general rule, my approach to SEO is always like content first, right? Like using content as a way to build legitimate value that signals SEO. Because I mean, if you just fundamentally think about Google and Google's mission, it's not to like reward people for playing SEO the best. It's to reward people for creating the best and most useful and most relevant content. I think at the end of the day, you can play these games and you can maybe get short-term results and stuff, but it's just a matter of time generally before you get smacked with the ban hammer or whatever, and now you got to start from scratch. And so I would say just play by the rules first and foremost. Like no matter what new trend or trick or tip or hack or whatever for SEO that you may have in the back of your head is a proven thing. In my opinion, don't bother with it.
You heard it here first, kids. Play by the rules.
It's true. I mean, yeah.
No, it's interesting that you say that, though. I actually remember reading like an interview or hearing an interview from like a Google team member like maybe a year or two ago, and they were like, "Oh, we don't consider SEO people to have a seat at the table." There's a lot of people that have seats at the table, right? SEO people are not one of them, because and that makes sense, right? But content creators, he didn't say explicitly, but content creators maybe are, right? Because they want good content. They don't want just people optimizing on that, right? Like fundamentally, they're trying to help people get their stuff answered. And if there ever comes a day where Google's not answering your questions, they go out of business,
Right.
Well, not at this point, but like, yeah. Okay, cool. So no black hat. And so what's sort of the things that are working today? What's my kind of best practices? Or let's say I'm young, I'm hungry, I don't have a ton of knowledge, but I'm willing to learn, I'm willing to roll up my sleeves. What would be, if you were designing, if you were, because I get a lot of questions too about low budget marketing, right? And so a lot of people instantly think SEO, they think content, which isn't necessarily true, but oftentimes can be. And so, kind of, let's say I'm young, I'm hungry, I'm rolling up my sleeves. What do you do today to start executing on an awesome content marketing program that's going to get you some results? Not necessarily tomorrow, but a couple of months down the line.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think like kind of the best practices that we use right now is basically first and foremost, we're trying to create content for humans, for people, and so I think that's the number one thing. We're still doing a lot of the same stuff that has been part of SEO and content for a long time, which is keyword research and understanding what people are searching for and matching content to keywords and kind of doing that whole thing. But I think the one piece that people are maybe lacking is so I think like if you think of like the spectrum of things that you can do, like on one side you've got sort of like all these like crazy gray hat, black hat things that you can do to try to like game Google or like whatever, or hack your rankings. And then on the far other side, you've got sort of like this very like hands-off approach, which somebody might listen to this podcast and they say, okay, this guy said to just do content, just focus on content. So they're just going to create a bunch of content, they're just going to publish on their blog, and they're just going to sit around and wait and like hope that something happens, which I think is exactly wrong, right? So what you want to do with that, you want to do something with that content that's going to help drive traffic, build links, do something beyond just sort of publish and wait or blog and pray, as I sometimes say. And so, a big part of kind of modern content marketing and SEO is understanding different channels that you can use to promote content, whether that be direct email outreach to different people, whether it's pitching media, whether it's sharing it in LinkedIn groups, whatever it is. Like that's where kind of the hustle part comes into play, and that's where you get like value. Like if you're just creating content and you're trying to keep your budget low, but you want to get results, like that's the part that you've got to do, because anyone can write content and anyone can write really good content, right? Like there's no
I can't.
Well, okay. Well, if you have enough time and revisions and whatever,
I'm getting better. I'm getting better.
Yeah.
The videos and podcasting are helping, but yeah.
So anyway, yeah. So, but at the end of the day, like the people that win in content marketing are the folks generally who are kind of hustling the hardest from an outreach and promotion perspective. So I think that's a big part of it right now, is like starting each piece of content that you're creating. Before you write a single word, think about how you're going to promote that content and what you're going to do with it at the end of the day, because that's another big piece, is that if I'm writing a piece of content that I want to post on Reddit, for instance, I've got to know in advance like
that.
I've got to know in advance like what that audience likes, and where I'm going to post that and what's going to resonate with those folks that I'm trying to reach. And it's different than hey, I'm going to pitch this to a bunch of journalists. And I think that's another place is where people kind of get tripped up too. And Jeremy, you and I have talked about this before, but I think some people that understand that promotion aspect, then again kind of go to the far end of the spectrum where they decide that every piece of content they create, they're gonna pitch it to a million journalists, and they're gonna publish it in every social media channel they can find. They're gonna pump it through whatever, they're going to do everything for every piece of content, which I think is also a little bit misguided, because I think certain types of content perform better at certain tasks within a strategy.
Could you elaborate on that? Like what do you see? What kind of content do you see doing well at specific things that are high value?
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, like, let's just take link building as an example, right? So, as we talked about, central thesis around link building is generally, if you can build links to your content, it's going to help that piece of content rank better, as well as kind of help other pieces of content across your website and pages on your site rank better overall. And so, a lot of people do link building, but the thing is that they'll write, they'll write an article, and it's say it's a 1,200 word article. It's it's a nice article about influencer marketing, and then they're going out and trying to ask people to link to this piece. But there's not really anything about that article that warrants a link, right? So like if you think about when you're creating content as a person, like you have kind of a natural reason why you link to other pieces. If you're referencing a statistic that they published, or maybe they have a really cool graph that you want to use, and you link to it. And so the idea of something being link worthy or linkable or having a linkable asset associated with it I think is a big piece of that process. And not every piece of content is gonna do well for that, right? So one other example of that is, we see a lot of companies that are really successful at link building, and a lot of our campaigns that are really successful are when we're pitching like media or news and we're trying to get write-ups about something that we've published. But in order for that to work, like, it's got to be newsworthy. Like, you have to come up with something new that like a journalist is going to use in their story. They're not just going to like write an article about, Jeremy published a new article on his blog today. Like, that's not newsworthy, right? So
Yeah, I
so
haven't.
thinking about that.
Yeah, people don't write about my tweets yet, but like, but you're right though. You're 100% right. I see people. It's like, yeah, oh hey CNN, real quick, can you write an article because I want more sales? That's not newsworthy, right? It's like, oh, I'm gonna donate a bunch of money, or I did this cool thing, or like you were even talking about like the citation stuff. Like, let me give this. Like, I'm not a content marketer, but let me give this like writing an article. But I've done a lot of influencer marketing. I've done a lot of paid influencer marketing. And so like me just writing about influencer marketing isn't all that interesting. Me writing about, hey, I worked with this reality TV star and this is what it's like to run their like social media account professionally. Like, that's interesting. Or at least I would think so. I don't know. But like,
yeah, well, and it's subjective, right? And it depends a lot on the industry too. I mean, that's another thing as well, is that, maybe, if you're working in, I don't know, HVAC industry or whatever, like maybe CNN doesn't really care that much about your content, but the trade journals might. And so it's understanding what you're going to do to promote that content before you create it. And that it goes so far as to not only what channels are you going to use to promote it, but if you're going to pitch it to people, who are you pitching it to, and what do they care about, and why would they be interested in linking to this article or sharing it or whatever you want them to do. So I think, yeah, in terms of like best practice, like that's probably the number one thing that I think that, kind of people who are, maybe early in content marketing or maybe don't have a sophisticated understanding is probably, they get wrong, is that they come into it and they, again, kind of take one or two approaches. Either they just publish stuff and wait for something magical to happen, or they publish stuff and they try to promote it through every possible channel they can think of every single time.
Right.
Which
I've been guilty of both.
Right. I mean, that's, and don't get me wrong, like, so have I. I mean, I think, for a long time there was kind of this pervasive feeling that like if you just created really good content, like it would automatically like rise to the top and kind of the cream would rise kind of thing. And I think, at this point, I think content marketing is just such a common strategy, and there's so much content being created that it's just not feasible that, it'll take off on its own without you putting some strategy behind it.
100%. That's great. So what are you seeing for the future of content marketing? What does that look like?
Yeah, so I think, probably the biggest evolution that we're seeing right now in content marketing is sort of the continued sort of convergence of content and SEO. And so, obviously we use content marketing as a tool generally to drive search traffic, right? So it's kind of the intersection of content and SEO for the most part. And so what we're seeing now is, with a lot of the recent updates from Google and the kind of the new algorithms and all the stuff that's happening, we're seeing a lot more about like sort of topical authority. And so if you think like historically, people have talked a lot about, what we call page authority, which is basically, just how many people are linking to this particular page. And then the idea of like site or domain authority, which is like, okay, how reputable is this website in general based on the number and quality of links to the whole site, which I think are still part of the process. Although I think a lot of people will argue about domain authority, but we won't get into the the SEO nerdery there. But I think what's happening now is that Google is getting much more sophisticated and smarter about understanding contextual and sort of semantic topics, right? And so, so if I've got a link to my site, again, use the HVAC example, and it's about, air conditioners, I can sort of pass some topical authority to multiple pages that all deal with air conditioning. So even if I've got, one piece of content about air conditioners that really is attracting a lot of links with the right sort of strategy and site structure and things like that, you can sort of pass some of that along to maybe some of your other pieces that weren't quite so link worthy, but are still relevant from a search perspective. So Google basically does a much better job now of understanding like, hey, this site is not only authoritative and like popular, but they're specifically authoritative and popular on topics related to air conditioning and AC compressors and AC repair or like
Right.
whatever the topics are.
Right. No, that makes a ton of sense actually, right? So it's like it's almost like the anti wire cutter, the wire cutter that did like all the affiliate stuff for a long time where it was just kind of
Yeah.
everything that they would put on it. This is
Mm-hmm.
more like kind of like Google kind of wants to put you into a category. If you have like a cooking blog, they're like, okay, like, you're writing a lot about like, I don't know, pots and pans or whatever. Like here's some other articles that maybe didn't rank great, but like you've got some internal linking going on and stuff like that. Like, let's give them all kind of a boost because clearly you're like a cooking authority or whatever, that sort of thing, I guess. Is that my understanding of that right?
Yeah, and I think your example is perfect too. I think that's sort of what Google is trying to combat at this point. Is if you think about sort of the way that search has worked in the past with sort of just site and domain authority, over time, the largest sites, sort of given a long enough timeline, the largest sites would basically just dominate across any industry
Right.
or niche because they just have the most links. And so obviously there has to be some nuance there. There has to be some better way of segmenting and understanding which sites are truly relevant to which topics. And I think that's what we're seeing now with Google is that they're just getting a lot better at doing that, and understanding, that, Mashable may be a great source for a lot of stuff, but they're not the experts at cooking, compared to, Bon Appetit or whatever. And so yeah, parsing that out, I think is a big part of their strategy. And we're seeing it from our side as well.
Could even go to like subcategories too, if you're like a cooking blogger or whatever and like you're trying to go to war with Bon Appetit, but you only do like, I don't know, Sicilian cooking or something like that. Now you can carve out just Sicilian cooking for yourself, right? Like you might not be able to overtake Bon Appetit as a whole, but maybe you could, just take out that little niche and like own that because you're the authority there. That's really interesting. All right, I'm gonna go into kind of our mailbag here a little bit, which by mailbag I mean request thread on Reddit, and we're gonna kind of jump into this. This is interesting. Somebody was talking about, and I think this falls under content marketing a little bit, so I'm gonna ask how would you incorporate like a content strategy, and I'm gonna paraphrase. How would you incorporate a content strategy into email? Like, you know what I mean? How do you incorporate like kind of a newsletter, daily, weekly? Best practices. What do you see going on?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the way that we think about that is, I mean, a lot of companies are still doing kind of the newsletter. That's just sort of everyone gets the roundup of the new content or whatever. And if that's kind of as sophisticated as you can get, I mean, it's better than nothing because you're hopefully you're driving some traffic and keeping people engaged. But I think ultimately where we try to move our clients to is having much more of a sort of a segmented funnel type of approach. So if we know, for instance, that someone came in on a piece about cold email for sales, and they either downloaded a content upgrade or signed up for a newsletter from that page, then we know specifically that they're looking for information about cold email. And so from that perspective, what we try to do is we try to build out kind of a sequence of content. And a lot of times we're publishing this stuff directly on the blog too, so it's kind of doing double duty. But what we would consider, kind of down funnel content, right? So at this point, this person is kind of top of the funnel. They're sort of vaguely qualified because we know that they have a pain point around cold email and sales. And so we can feed them a sequence of content that sort of transitions them from that pain point to, hey, this product is the solution and here's how it's going to solve your problems. And so I think, when we think about email, we definitely think about it in terms of a sequence of content that moves someone from the top of the funnel to the bottom. And how do we put that together?
100% makes sense. Another question here. Any content that you've seen specifically work well on LinkedIn?
Ooh, that's a good one.
Besides Broetry.
Yeah, well,
or maybe
that's,
Broetry. Actually, we should talk about Broetry.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. LinkedIn is sort of its own microcosm, right? Because all these guys with their Broetry posts have sort of.
Maybe we should probably define
Broetry. Right. Yeah. So
we're just saying
so Broetry is sort of this strategy or tactic that has been really popular on LinkedIn lately, where people will write sort of these sort of engagement bait type of posts. Generally you can tell right away that it's quote unquote Broetry because it'll be like one sentence per line, and each sentence is like 3 words. And basically
it always starts off with something like, I lit my house on fire today.
Right.
Like, or
Yeah, it's
something
always,
like
yeah,
that.
it's engagement.
I shot my dog in the front yard or something like ridiculous.
Right. Right. Well, and here's the right. I mean, you got to give these guys props, right? Like what they've basically done is sort of reverse engineered the LinkedIn algorithm, and they figured out that if you can get someone to click the read more link, then LinkedIn, it counts that as an engagement, basically, right? And so it expands the reach of that post. And so that's been sort of evolving over the last like year to 2 years, as people have kind of cracked the algorithm of LinkedIn, and LinkedIn has been sort of playing a game of cat and mouse of trying to, sort of limit the ability to sort of hack their engagement, if you will. So I think, first and foremost, like, yeah, some of that like personal anecdote stuff does actually seem to work pretty well on LinkedIn, which is maybe surprising given that, I think people think of LinkedIn as more of a kind of stiff business oriented site, but
There's a
more
surprising amount of clickbait.
yeah, I mean, and honestly, I mean, I think it does work. I think that to some extent kind of is riding a kind of a bigger cultural trend, which is, that I think millennials especially feel that there's sort of a blend between like their personal lives and their professional lives, much more so than other generations. And so the idea of like being strictly business at work or on LinkedIn or whatever maybe doesn't hold the same weight as it did for other generations. So I think, yeah, having some of that, obviously you want it to remain somewhat professional, I think, but having more of a personal, like, here's what I personally learned, or a very important thing that I know or happened to me as it relates to business. I think that's definitely a true trend that we're seeing in LinkedIn. The other thing too, I think that's really taken off on LinkedIn, if you've got sort of the setup to do it, is definitely video stuff. And I think for the same reasons as kind of the broetry trend, is like it's a little bit of an engagement hack. People are more likely to stop for a second or click on mute or whatever. That just shows that they're engaged with it, rather than just scrolling past it.
Yeah. So I actually was going to jump in at the end of your rant and say that I post all my daily marketing videos to my LinkedIn, and I get the best engagement out of any platform on there. Likes, new connection requests, shares, all sorts of cool stuff. So LinkedIn, video on LinkedIn is very hot, and like, just, I haven't dug too deep into like understanding the why, but like I've just personally experienced it.
Yeah, and LinkedIn is also an interesting platform because I think they're continuing to try to reward other content formats that are native, just like Facebook did with video, right? Like, you get much more engagement if you're posting video straight to the Facebook platform rather than linking to YouTube or whatever. And I think LinkedIn is trying to do a lot of the same stuff. And so, just kind of like posting a post with a link to an article a lot of times won't get the same engagement as writing a long article either directly on the native LinkedIn publishing platform, or writing a long post and then putting a link in the comments or whatever. And so I think that's where you can kind of tinker with your strategy there a little bit to maximize the way the platform works.
That's actually, I don't know if that's still true, but when I did do some blogs on LinkedIn a couple of years back, it would do a push notification to every one of my connections at that time. And so I would get like crazy high reads on it and stuff like that. So, I think that just in general was, and I'm not qualified to talk about content, but I just want to jump in on the end of yours and say that, like, when it comes to social, if a platform has launched a new feature, adopt it immediately and start using it as much as you can, because they're going to give you weight for using the new feature because they're trying to make that work. You know what I mean? So that's just like a general trend that I've seen, whether it's with ads or whatever. If there's a new ad type on Facebook, I am all over that immediately, right? Because they're going to give a discount to get people to start using it because they want to see good stuff out of the gate. Same with anything else. So okay, cool. So let's do two more, and then I will let you go because it's Friday afternoon and you're gonna be late to your team hangout, I think, if I keep you too long. So here's an interesting one. Offline content and how to like tie it into an online strategy.
Oh,
Like, yeah. Did he stump you, or
no.
he or she, I suppose?
No, I mean, I don't think I'm stumped at all. It's actually funny. I think we're at a weird point where we're sort of reverting back to printed content as a strategy. A lot of companies for years, everyone was like, go digital you're an idiot, basically. and now I think like there's it's sort of left a little bit of a vacuum for some printed content in different industries. One shining example, in my opinion, is Airbnb. Right? They publish their own magazine. Like, I mean, it's crazy to me that we kind of have gone full circle, right? Where we went from travel magazines to travel blogs back to travel magazines. And so I think I think it works in a certain context. I guess what I would not expect from that is the same kind of like directly attributable conversions or like ROI that you may expect from digital content. Obviously online you can, if you're doing it right, you can track every click and attribute every dollar that's coming in the door. Whereas offline, it's much more of a brand building kind of exercise. And so it's a lot harder to quantify the results that you're getting. But if you have the budget to invest in sort of broader lifestyle and branding initiatives, I think it can be a really powerful tool. And not to say that you can't drive some conversions or some online action, because I think you can. If you're maybe you're I don't know, publishing a book or something, and you get links to like a microsite or something in the back, but obviously only some percentage of people are going to bother to type that into their browser, so you can't expect a huge conversion rate on that funnel per se. But I do think it has its place, and it can be effective if it's done well.
Okay, great. Last question. So, as a small business owner, I'm overwhelmed by daily ideas for content. How do you select which ones, and how do you tell which ones are going to be the most successful?
That's a great question. So, I mean, first of all, I would say I think the most important thing with content, and I think this is where we've gotten much more sophisticated as an industry, is that it used to be, the process of content strategy and content planning was basically just get a bunch of people in the room, spitball a bunch of ideas, and then put them into your calendar, and you just wrote, kind of work through the list. Whereas now, again, if you kind of start with the end goal in mind, and kind of work backward, then you can sort of qualify that content before you create it, and you can create content that has a specific purpose rather than just, we think it would be cool if we wrote an article about X. And so, what I do personally, because it does flow both ways a little bit, right? Like a lot of times something will pop into my head and I'll be like, oh, that would make a great article. But then what I want to do is I want to kind of go qualify that against some metric. So one example of that would be, for me personally, if I think of an idea, I usually throw it into a Trello board that is just kind of a space to keep ideas. And then when I'm planning content, what I do is I kind of go through and I say, okay, if I was going to write this article, like what would be my ultimate goal? And then I go through that qualification process, just like if I were kind of going through it and creating a strategy from scratch. So I'll say, okay, I think this would perform really well on LinkedIn. Let's go to LinkedIn and search for topics around this and see, hey, did this get a lot of engagement? Were people interested in this topic, et cetera? And so that would be kind of my process of, going from the initial idea to kind of refining, like, okay, what am I going to do with that? And is it is it going to have an impact? And then I guess the other question is kind of priority or like order. And I think that really just kind of depends on where you're at and what your larger goals are. So as I said, a lot of our clients, we're looking at long-term growth. So we kind of prioritize link building, evergreen content, et cetera, over something that maybe is going to drive a bunch of traffic to LinkedIn, but it's going to die out. It's going to have a short shelf life. But that's not for everyone, right? Some people, I don't know, if you're starting a small business or whatever, maybe you kind of live and die by those traffic spikes, and that's what you need. So I think prioritizing it against kind of your larger strategy is pretty important.
Interesting. And one thing I want to drop on top of that too, one thing that worked for me, and I don't know if it's best practice or not, feel free to tell me if it's stupid, but like just personal bias with like the kinds of content that I want to produce, because I would blog and pray and I got no traction for years basically. And then I was like, I actually like doing videos and talking is like really natural to me, and it doesn't feel draining. It's actually energizing. And so like, because it means I keep up with it. And because like I'm putting energy into it, it seems to work. Even if it's suboptimal, it's something that I can commit to and like actually get out the door every single day. So I don't know. Maybe I don't know if that makes sense or not, but
no,
that's
absolutely,
what I'm choosing.
Absolutely. I mean, and I think that's a good point, is that different people are at different stages and have different resources available to them, etc. And so if it's just you and you're trying to motivate yourself to keep on top of your content and stuff, sometimes you gotta throw the best practices out the window a little bit, right? You just gotta do what you feel like you can get done in that day. And maybe that's not, the perfect optimized post, but at least you feel good that you publish something and it might move the needle a little bit. And it's one of those things. It kind of goes back to, like the idea of like perfecting any kind of startup or growing company, right? You have this idea that you want something to be perfect before you ship it or whatever. And, time and time again, we hear the advice, don't wait until it's perfect, because it's never going to be perfect.
Right. Cool. Well, Tyler, I'm going to end this by letting you throw out whatever you want. Chill for yourself completely. Like, go be as salesy as you want. Like, let you do that, and then we'll end the episode. But thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate the insights. If you're listening to this right now, this is one of the best content marketers in the game. Ignore his advice at your peril. In all seriousness, this guy has done it time and time again, in-house and with clients. If he can do it, you might be able to do it, but you'll have a better chance if you listen to his advice. So thank you, Tyler, for being here. And say whatever you want to say.
Thanks a lot, Jeremy. Really appreciate it. I guess, if you guys are interested in checking out our company and our approach to content marketing, the site is yesoptimist.com, yesoptimist.com. And if you're interested also in a case study and kind of a pretty in-depth tactical and strategic breakdown of the scaling from 0 to 1 million users with a startup, you can go to yesoptimist.com/100K, and that should redirect you straight to the case study there. Always happy to answer questions or anything. So if you do have any questions, feel free to get in touch. My email's on the website, and always happy to help however I can.
Excellent. Thank you. And we'll be linking to the website in the post. So thank you again, Tyler Hakes, awesome content marketer. Thank you so much for joining us, and everybody out there, happy marketing.